You know, I was at my local coffee shop the other day watching a woman frantically tapping her smartwatch after climbing 2 flights of stairs, and I couldn't help but think, when did exercise become homework? And that's when it hit me that this woman probably wasn't just tracking her steps for personal satisfaction. No, chances are pretty good that somewhere in some sterile corporate office, a wellness program administrator was getting ready to send her a cheerful email about how she's 7 steps away from earning a $5 Subway gift card. Because today, I want to talk about corporate wellness programs, and specifically how they've evolved from, hey, maybe try not to die at your desk, into something that would make George Orwell say, wait, you're monitoring their what now? Now, on the surface, workplace wellness sounds great, doesn't it? Companies caring about employee health, encouraging people to move more, eat better, maybe take a mental health day. It's like having a concerned parent, except your parent can fire you and also somehow knows exactly how many times you went to the bathroom yesterday. But here's where things get weird. According to recent research, corporate wellness programs now cover over 50 million American workers. 50 million. That's more people than live in South Korea, and significantly more than should be comfortable sharing their biometric data with the same HR department that still hasn't figured out how the printer works. And I should clarify what we're talking about here when we say wellness programs, because it's not just about bringing in a yoga instructor once a month or replacing the vending machine Snickers with slightly less terrible protein bars. No, modern wellness programs can track your steps, monitor your heart rate, analyze your sleep patterns, and in some cases even keep tabs on your menstrual cycle. Which, I'm sorry, but if my boss knows more about my reproductive health than I do, we've crossed a line somewhere. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, well, surely this is all voluntary, right? Companies can't just force employees to wear monitoring devices. And you'd be technically correct in the same way that technically no one's forcing you to have a social security number. Sure, you don't have to participate in your company's wellness program. You'll just mysteriously lose out on health insurance discounts, face higher premiums, and somehow always get passed over for promotions. Pure coincidence, I'm sure. The thing is, these programs didn't start out invasive. They began innocuously enough in the 1980s with basic health screenings and maybe a company-sponsored fun run that absolutely no one wanted to do, but everyone pretended was such a great idea. But somewhere along the way, someone in a boardroom had the brilliant realization that if you can measure something, you can manage it. And if you can manage it, you can optimize it. And if you can optimize it, you can probably squeeze a few more productive hours out of your human resources. Because that's what we're really talking about here. Not health, not wellness, productivity. Let me give you an example of how this works. A 2009 report claimed that a transportation authority in Austin, Texas, saw a return of $2.43 for every dollar spent on employee wellness. Impressive, right? Except when you dig into how they calculated that number, it turns out they were measuring things like absenteeism and productivity loss. In other words, they weren't measuring whether employees were actually healthier or happier. They were measuring whether employees were showing up to work more often and producing more output per hour. It's like judging the success of a marriage by how efficiently the couple does the dishes. Sure, a well-functioning partnership might result in clean plates, but if you're only measuring dishware cleanliness, you're probably missing the point of human relationships. And this is where things get particularly disturbing, because when you frame employee health as a productivity problem, some very weird corporate logic starts to make sense. Take musculoskeletal disorders, for instance. These are injuries from repetitive motion, poor ergonomics, or just sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day, staring at a computer screen. According to a 2017 report, these workplace-generated injuries are increasing, especially among millennials, due to technology use and remote work. Now, a reasonable response might be, hey, maybe we should give people more breaks, better chairs, or encourage a healthier work-life balance. But instead, the report recommended educating employees about the RICE system. That's rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Essentially, here's how to treat your work-related injury at home so you can come back tomorrow and get injured again. It's like a restaurant with a broken freezer handing out antacids instead of fixing the freezer, technically addressing the symptom while completely ignoring the cause. But my favorite example of wellness program logic comes from the American Journal of Managed Care, which published a paper with the delightfully blunt title, "Employers Should Disband Employee Weight Control Programs." The authors found that these programs could actually harm employee health by encouraging crash dieting and creating workplace environments where larger employees faced humiliation narration and discrimination. But here's the kicker. Even with evidence that weight-focused wellness programs can be harmful, they're still incredibly popular. Why? Because they're not really about health. They're about the appearance of health, which is much easier to measure and manage. And if you want to see just how far down this rabbit hole we've gone, consider some of the features that modern wellness apps are now offering to employers. There are apps that can track employee stress levels through voice analysis during phone calls, apps that monitor typing patterns to detect fatigue or distraction, apps that use smartphone cameras to analyze employee posture throughout the day. Some even claim to be able to predict sick days before employees themselves know they're getting ill. It's worth noting that in many other countries, this level of workplace surveillance would be illegal. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation severely limits what employers can collect and analyze about employee health data. In Germany, works councils, employee representation bodies, have the legal right to review and reject wellness programs that they consider too invasive. But in the United States, we've somehow convinced ourselves that this level of monitoring is not only acceptable, but beneficial. We've created a system where the same employers who argue they can't afford to provide adequate healthcare benefits are simultaneously spending billions of dollars on technology to monitor whether their employees are healthy enough to deserve those benefits. And this brings us to the surveillance aspect, because modern wellness programs don't just ask you to step on a scale once a year. They want continuous real-time data. We're talking about apps that track every footstep, devices that monitor heart rate variability, and platforms that can tell your employer whether you're getting enough REM sleep. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. What's the big deal? I already share my workout data with my fitness app. How is this different? Well, the difference is that your fitness app can't fire you. Your fitness app doesn't control your health insurance premiums. And your fitness app probably isn't sharing your data with the same people who decide whether you get promoted or laid off. But beyond the obvious power dynamics, there's also the psychological impact of being constantly monitored by your employer. Studies have shown that workplace surveillance can increase stress levels, reduce job satisfaction, and actually harm the very health outcomes these programs claim to improve. When employees know their every movement is being tracked and analyzed, many report feeling like they're under constant evaluation, even during their personal time. Some employees have described developing what researchers call wellness anxiety, obsessive worry about meeting arbitrary health metrics that have little to do with actual well-being. Others report feeling guilty for taking sick days or mental health breaks because they know their wellness participation scores will suffer. It's like having a fitness trainer who never leaves, never sleeps, and has the power to affect your livelihood. And here's where the legal landscape gets murky, because workplace wellness programs exist in this weird regulatory grey area. If your company offers wellness benefits through your health insurance plan, then your health information is technically protected by HIPAA. But if your company runs its own wellness program outside of the health plan, then HIPAA doesn't apply at all. Your employer can collect, analyze, and potentially use your health data however they want, as long as they don't violate other employment laws. It's like the difference between your medical records being locked in a doctor's filing cabinet versus being stored in your boss's desk drawer. Technically, both are secure storage, but one of them has very different implications for your career prospects. And this is where we get into some genuinely dystopian territory. Because once companies start collecting detailed health and behavioral data on their employees, it becomes very tempting to use that data for purposes beyond wellness. Why not use step count data to evaluate work ethic? Why not correlate sleep patterns with job performance? Why not flag employees whose stress levels suggest they might be job hunting? I'm not saying companies are definitely doing this. I'm saying that when you give someone a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. And when you give HR departments access to biometric data, everything starts looking like a performance metric. Now, there are some legitimately positive aspects to workplace wellness programs. Companies that provide on-site medical screenings can catch health problems early. Programs that offer mental health resources and stress management can genuinely help employees. And yes, some people do benefit from the motivation and community aspects of workplace wellness initiatives. But here's my concern. We've created a system where your employer has unprecedented insight into your personal health and behavior, and we're calling it wellness. It's wellness for the company's bottom line, maybe, but for employees, it's increasingly looking like surveillance with a yoga mat. And this matters more than you might think, because workplace wellness programs are expanding rapidly. The wellness industry has tripled in size since 2010, growing to $8 billion annually. That's billion with a B. For context, that's more than the GDP of most small countries, and it's all built on the premise that companies should be monitoring their employees' bodies, But what's particularly insidious about this growth is how these programs create new forms of workplace discrimination that are perfectly legal under current law. Employees with chronic health conditions often find themselves penalized by wellness programs that assume all health problems are preventable through lifestyle changes. Someone with diabetes might face higher insurance premiums because their blood sugar levels don't meet arbitrary wellness program targets. Workers with depression might be flagged as high risk for missing wellness activities during mental health episodes. I've seen cases where employees with disabilities have been excluded from wellness program incentives because they couldn't participate in physical activities, despite the fact that this exclusion likely violates the Americans with Disabilities Act. But companies get around this by making the programs technically voluntary while creating significant financial penalties for non-participation. Some programs now impose penalties of up to 30% of total health insurance costs for employees who don't meet wellness requirements. For a family health insurance plan that costs $15,000 annually, that's a $4,500 penalty for failing to satisfy your employer's definition of healthy behavior. That's not a wellness incentive, that's economic coercion. Think about that for a moment. We live in a society where your boss can know your resting heart rate, your sleep quality, how many steps you took yesterday, and whether you've been to the gym this week. But try asking that same boss for a living wage, better benefits, or reasonable work-life balance, and suddenly it's sorry, budget constraints. It's like having a relationship where your partner monitors your every move, but won't commit to basic emotional support. I know exactly when you went to bed last night and what you had for breakfast, but I can't remember to give you a cost of living raise. And here's the really frustrating part. Actual workplace wellness isn't that complicated. You want healthier employees? Give them livable wages so they can afford healthy food and healthcare. Provide reasonable hours so they can sleep and exercise. Offer genuine work-life balance so they're not chronically stressed. Create a workplace culture that doesn't treat human beings like machines that occasionally need maintenance. But instead, we've chosen the more technologically complex and invasive route. Rather than addressing the root causes of workplace stress and health problems, we're monitoring the symptoms and gamifying the solutions. The irony is that some of the most effective workplace health interventions are also the simplest and least invasive. Companies that have implemented unlimited sick leave policies report lower overall absenteeism. Organizations that provide on-site childcare see reduced employee stress levels. Businesses that offer flexible work arrangements often see improvements in both productivity and employee health metrics. But these approaches require companies to trust their employees and invest in structural changes rather than surveillance technology. They require treating workers as human beings capable of making their own health decisions rather than as data points to be optimized. And apparently that's a much harder sell than buying everyone a fitness tracker. It's like trying to solve homelessness by giving everyone really good sleeping bag tracking devices. You're measuring something, sure, but you're not actually solving the problem. And this brings me to what I think is the most insidious aspect of corporate wellness programs. They put the responsibility for workplace health entirely on individual employees. Feeling stressed? There's an app for that. Experiencing burnout? Try our mindfulness program. Developing repetitive strain injuries? Here's a video about proper ergonomics. Notice what's missing from these solutions. Any acknowledgement that workplace conditions might be contributing to these health problems. It's all about optimizing the employee, never about examining the work environment. This is particularly problematic when you consider that many of the health issues these programs claim to address are directly related to working conditions. Chronic stress, depression, anxiety, musculoskeletal problems, sleep disorders, cardiovascular disease. These aren't just random health problems that happen to affect working people. These are often the predictable results of workplace cultures that prioritize productivity over human well-being. But rather than addressing those workplace cultures, we've created an entire industry dedicated to helping employees cope with the health consequences of bad jobs. It's like selling umbrellas instead of fixing the roof. And here's where the surveillance aspect becomes particularly troubling, because wellness programs don't just monitor your health, they monitor your compliance with company-approved healthy behaviors. Did you hit your step goal? Did you complete your stress management module? Did you attend the voluntary but somehow mandatory wellness seminar? And speaking of those goals, let me tell you about some of the specific requirements companies are actually implementing. Some wellness programs require employees to walk a certain number of steps per day, typically 10,000, regardless of whether they work 12-hour shifts, have mobility issues, or live in areas where walking outside isn't safe. Miss your daily target too often, and you might face higher insurance premiums. Other programs require employees to maintain specific biometric markers, blood pressure, cholesterol levels, body mass index, as if chronic diseases are simply a matter of insufficient willpower. I've seen programs that require employees to prove they're not smoking by submitting to random nicotine tests. Imagine explaining to your family that you might lose your health insurance because your company doesn't trust you to report your own smoking habits accurately. And then there are the voluntary health screenings that aren't really voluntary at all. These typically involve giving blood samples, submitting to body fat measurements, and answering detailed questions about your personal medical history, all in front of co-workers and company representatives. Some employees have reported being pressured to disclose mental health information, prescription medications, and family medical histories as part of these screenings. But perhaps my favorite example of corporate wellness overreach comes from programs that monitor employee bathroom breaks. Yes, you heard that right. Some companies have implemented systems that track how long employees spend away from their desks, ostensibly to encourage movement breaks, but functionally creating a system where your bladder schedule becomes a workplace performance metric. The message is clear: your health is your responsibility, and we'll be watching to make sure you're taking it seriously. Never mind that we control your work schedule, your break times, your physical work environment, and your financial security, all factors that significantly impact health. No, the problem is clearly that you're not walking enough. This reminds me of those dystopian science fiction stories where the government monitors citizens for their own good. Except in our version, it's your employer, and they're not even pretending it's for your own good. They're pretty explicit that it's about reducing healthcare costs and increasing productivity. At least Big Brother had the courtesy to claim he was protecting people. Corporate wellness programs are more like, we're watching you for quarterly earnings reasons. And this is where I think we need to step back and ask some fundamental questions about what we want the relationship between employers and employees to look like. Because the current trajectory of workplace wellness programs suggests we're moving toward a model where companies have access to intimate details about their employees' bodies and behaviors, justified by the promise of lower healthcare costs and higher productivity. But is that really the society we want to live in? One where your boss knows your heart rate variability better than your spouse does, where your employer tracks your sleep patterns and menstrual cycles, where your job security might depend partly on your ability to generate the right kind of biometric data. I'm not arguing against workplace health initiatives in principle. Companies should care about employee well-being, but there's a difference between supporting employee health and surveilling employee bodies. There's a difference between providing resources and requiring participation. And there's a big difference between addressing workplace health problems and shifting responsibility for those problems onto individual employees while monitoring their compliance with corporate-approved solutions. The goal should be creating workplaces that support human health and flourishing, not creating more sophisticated ways to monitor and manage human productivity. And that starts with recognizing that employee wellness isn't a technology problem that can be solved with apps and wearable devices. It's a human problem that requires treating workers like human beings rather than biological assets to be optimized. Because at the end of the day, the most effective workplace wellness program might be the simplest one. Treating employees fairly, paying them adequately, respecting their time and autonomy, and creating work environments that don't systematically damage their physical and mental health. But I suppose that approach doesn't generate nearly as much data. And if there's one thing we've learned about modern corporate culture, it's that if you can't measure it, it doesn't count, even if it happens to be human dignity. So the next time your employer offers you a voluntary wellness program that requires you to share your biometric data in exchange for slightly lower insurance premiums, remember that you're not just joining a health initiative. You're participating in an experiment about how much surveillance working people are willing to accept in exchange for basic healthcare affordability. And frankly, the result of that experiment should concern all of us, whether we're wearing fitness trackers or not. Because once we've established that employers have a right to monitor their workers' bodies in the name of wellness, it's not clear where that logic stops. Today, it's step counts and sleep patterns. Tomorrow, it might be anything else that can be measured, analyzed, and optimized for corporate benefit. The question we need to ask ourselves is, how much of our privacy and autonomy are we willing to trade for the promise of workplace wellness? And more importantly, are we getting a fair deal? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like we're giving up quite a lot and getting surprisingly little in return, unless you count the privilege of being surveilled by your employer as a benefit, which frankly seems like a pretty tough sell.